Recognized missing prior analysis, synthesized framework details into original story, recognized missing prior analysis, synthesized framework details into original story. Everyone at Brennan Voss Structural assumed the woman scrubbing coffee rings off the boardroom table couldn't read a blueprint, which is exactly why nobody noticed when Delphine Marchand stopped wiping for a full 10 seconds and stared at the drawings someone had left scattered across the glass. She had come in at 5:40 that morning, the way she did every morning, because the 6:15 bus from Vanier got her downtown before the rush, and because being early meant she could finish the lobby before the partners arrived and never had to feel them step around her. 43 years old, a janitor's badge clipped to a navy polo 2 sizes too big, a cart that squeaked on its back left wheel no matter how much WD-40 she gave it. To the people who worked on the 14th floor of that glass tower on Albert Street, Delphine was a presence the way the HVAC was a presence, necessary, unremarkable, and entirely beneath their notice. What none of them knew was that 30 years earlier, in a kitchen in Hearst with frost feathering the inside of the window, a 12-year-old Delphine had taught herself to calculate load paths using a library book about cathedrals and the back of her father's cigarette cartons. She set down her rag. The drawings on the table were for the Rideau Crossing, a pedestrian bridge the firm had been chasing for 2 years, the kind of marquee project that made careers. She knew about it because she emptied the recycling bins, and the firm's pride was loud, and it spilled into break-room conversations she wasn't supposed to overhear. The renderings had been in the lobby for months, a sleek steel ribbon arcing over the canal, lit gold at night, the sort of thing that would end up on postcards. Tomorrow the design was going to the city for final structural sign-off. And the connection detail in front of her was wrong. Not stylistically wrong, not a matter of opinion. The gusset plate where the main truss met the eastern abutment was carrying a tension load it could not carry. The bolt pattern was undersized, the geometry forced, an eccentricity nobody had accounted for, and under a full pedestrian load on a freezing February afternoon, with the steel contracted and brittle, that joint was going to do exactly what physics said it would do. Delphine knew this the way she knew her own phone number. She didn't have to think about it. She just saw it, the same way some people see a wrong note in a song. She stood there a long time, the HVAC hummed. Outside, the sky over the Gatineau Hills was going from black to the color of dishwater. Then she did what she had trained herself, over 20 years of cleaning other people's offices, to always do. She put the rag back in her hand and she kept moving. Because the last time Delphine Marchand had pointed out that a man with a degree was wrong, it had cost her everything, and she had promised herself she would never make that mistake again. To understand why she put the rag back, you have to understand the kitchen in Hearst, and the man who used to sit at that frosted window. Marcel Marchand had been a millwright at the pulp mill until the day a chain hoist let go and took 3 of his fingers and most of his back with it. After that, he was a man who sat. He sat and he drank and he watched his daughter, who was clearly the smartest person any of them had ever met, with an expression that curdled a little more each year. Half pride, half something he would never have admitted was fear, because Delphine wasn't supposed to be smart. Smart got you out, and out meant gone, and Marcel had already lost his hands. He was not prepared to lose the girl who buttered his toast because he couldn't hold a knife. So when the teachers called, and they called, because a kid who corrects the physics in the grade 11 textbook gets noticed even in a town of 4,500 people, Marcel told them she was needed at home. Which was true. Her mother had left when Delphine was 9, and somebody had to cook and clean and fill out the forms and stretch the disability check across a month that always had too many days in it. By 16, she could keep a household running on fumes and spite. By 18, she'd missed so much school catching up on the rest of her life that the scholarship people stopped writing. She didn't blame him. That was the thing people never understood when she told the short version of the story. She didn't blame Marcel. He was a wrecked man doing the only kind of love he had left, which was the love that holds on too tight. She blamed the world a little for being arranged so that a girl like her had exactly one thread to climb, and it could be cut by something as small as a missed deadline. She had tried once to climb anyway. 23. Marcel finally in the ground, Delphine took the bus to Sudbury with $400 and enrolled in a civil engineering technology program at the college. She was the best student they'd ever had. She knew it. The instructors knew it. There's a particular silence that falls over a classroom when someone answers a question nobody else even understood, and Delphine learned what that silence felt like. She also learned what it felt like to be a woman from a trailer park in a room full of guys whose fathers were engineers in 2005, when nobody thought twice about saying out loud what they assumed about her. There was an instructor named Bergeron. There was a project, a retaining wall design, her best work, genuinely brilliant, and there was Bergeron putting his name above hers on the paper that won the regional competition, and there was Delphine, who had never in her life learned to be quiet, standing up in front of the department and saying so. She was right. Everyone knew she was right. It didn't matter even a little bit. Bergeron had tenure and a reputation and a long memory, and Delphine had a tuition balance and no one to call. By the time the smoke cleared, she'd been counseled out of the program for professionalism concerns. Her transcript salted, her $400 long gone. She went home, to a Sudbury bachelor apartment that was home, only in the sense that it was where her stuff was, and she took the first job that didn't require a reference, which was cleaning offices at night. That was the lesson she carried for 20 years and laid back down on the boardroom table that morning along with her rag. Being right is not a shield. Being right, if you are the wrong kind of person, is a target. So she finished the boardroom. She finished the lobby. She rode the squeaking cart down to the supply closet and clocked out at 8 and went home to Vanier and slept her daytime sleep. And the Rideau crossing drawings sat upstairs with their beautiful wrong joint waiting. Except she couldn't sleep. This is the part the people who tell Delphine's story always rush through, but it was the longest part. It was a whole day. She lay in her dark room with the box fan running, and she thought about the bridge. She thought about a Saturday in February, the canal frozen below. Winterlude crowds, families, kids on skates slung over their shoulders, somebody's grandmother, packed onto that gold-lit ribbon, and the temperatures at -6 and the steel pulling tight against itself, and one bolt that some junior had copied from a different detail without checking the math, because the senior who signed off didn't check it either, because why would he? The firm had never been wrong. She thought, not my problem. I am a janitor. I have a clean badge and a clean record and a bus pass and a landlord who likes me. I have a life that does not include a man like Bergeron deciding what happens to me. And then she thought about the grandmother on the skates. Around 4 in the afternoon, she got up and made coffee and sat at her own kitchen table. Small, scarred, but hers, and she did the math again by hand on the back of a hydro bill the way she'd done it at 12, just to be sure she wasn't a tired woman seeing ghosts. She wasn't. The joint failed. It failed with a safety factor below 1, which in the language she'd never been allowed to make a career out of, meant it does not fail if, it fails when. She knew who Gerald Voss was. Everybody in that building knew who Gerald Voss was. Senior partner, name on the door, the man who walked through the lobby every morning at 8:50 looking at his phone so he'd never have to make eye contact with anyone holding a cleaning cart. He had once stepped over a wet floor sign she'd just set out and then complained to building management that the cleaning staff left hazards in the walkway. She'd been written up for it. She remembered his shoes. 60-year-old man, $800 shoes, stepping over the sign she'd put there to keep him from falling. That was the man who was going to sign the bridge. She went in the next morning at 5:40, the way she always did. But this time she brought the hydro bill folded in her back pocket, and she didn't head for the supply closet. She rode the elevator to 14, and she walked into the boardroom, and she stood at the glass table where the drawings still lay, and she waited. The first person in was a junior named Aiden Cho, 26, who came in at 7 because he was the one who was always blamed when things weren't ready, and he'd learned the only defense was to be early. He saw the janitor standing in the boardroom not cleaning anything, and he stopped in the doorway with his messenger bag still on his shoulder. Sorry, is there a spill? He asked, because that was the only reason his brain could supply for why she'd be standing there. The eastern abutment connection on the Rideau crossing, Delphine said. The gusset plate. The bolt group's undersized. You've got an eccentric load on that joint that nobody's resolved, and it'll fail in cold weather under full pedestrian load. I think it's a copy-paste error from a different detail. You should pull it before it goes to the city. There is a particular silence that falls over a room when someone answers a question nobody asked. Aiden Cho stood in it for what felt to him like a very long time. What was happening in Aiden's head in those seconds was not what Delphine expected. She expected the smirk. She'd braced for the smirk her whole life. But Aiden Cho was the one who had drawn that connection detail. He'd flagged it himself 3 weeks ago to the project lead, a tightening in his gut, a sense that the geometry was off, and he'd been told in front of the team that if he spent less time second-guessing senior staff and more time meeting deadlines, he might last in this industry. He had a master's degree from McGill and $90,000 in student debt, and a feeling in his stomach that he'd been taught to ignore. And now the woman who emptied his recycling bin was standing in the boardroom telling him, in the precise vocabulary of a structural engineer, the exact thing his gut had been screaming for 3 weeks. "How do you?" he started. "It doesn't matter how I know," Delphine said. "Check it. You don't have to believe me. You have to check it. That's all I'm asking." Then she picked her cart up from the hall and she went and cleaned the 14th floor, because she was, after all, on the clock. Aiden Cho did not check it that morning, because at 8:50 Gerald Voss walked in, and the day became about getting the package to the city by the 2 o'clock deadline, and a junior's nerves were not on the agenda. The drawings were rolled, the courier was called, and Aiden, who had a feeling in his stomach for the second time in 3 weeks, said nothing, because the first time had nearly ended him. This is where the story would have ended, most days. This is where it had ended for Delphine before, and for 1,000 people like her. The right answer spoken into a room that had already decided not to hear it, and then the slow, ordinary catastrophe of the world proceeding as planned. The package was going to the city, the bridge was going to be built, and on some cold Saturday the canal below. But Delphine Marchand had spent 20 years learning to be quiet, and she had spent one sleepless day deciding that she was done. At 11:40, while Gerald Voss was at lunch with 2 counselors at a steakhouse on Spark Street, Delphine wheeled her cart into the boardroom where Aiden Cho was eating a sad desk salad and pretending to review something. She unfolded the hydro bill and put it on the glass in front of him. On the back of it, in pencil, in a hand that was careful and old-fashioned, was the entire analysis, the free body diagram, the load resolution, the bolt shear calculation, the thermal contraction term that the firm's model had left out because someone had assumed an ambient temperature that does not occur in Ottawa in February, a safety factor circled of 0.81. Aiden looked at it for a long time. Then he got up and he went to his workstation and he ran the joint himself properly for the first time, the thing he'd been too frightened to do 3 weeks ago. It took him 11 minutes. He came back into the boardroom white in the face. "It's update 3, he said. "I got update 3. The difference is you used the published yield. I used the certified mill value off the steel order, which is lower." She said it the way you'd tell someone the time. Either way it's below 1, either way it fails. "Who are you?" Aiden said, and it was not a rude question. It was, for the first time in that building, an honest one. She told him the short version. Hearst, the kitchen, Sudbury, Bergeron, the retaining wall that won a competition under another man's name, the 20 years of cleaning carpets above the heads of men who would have spat their coffee laughing if she'd told them she could do their jobs in her sleep. She told it flatly, no self-pity, the way you read off a parts list. And Aiden Cho, 26, indebted, terrified, and decent, did the thing that changed both their lives. He said, "We have to stop the package." "You have to," Delphine said. "I'm a janitor. If I say it, I'm a crazy janitor, and on Monday I'm a fired crazy janitor. If you say it, you're an engineer doing his job." "They told me to stop second-guessing them." "I know." "They'll." "I know exactly what they'll do," Delphine said, and something in her voice made him stop. "I know better than anyone in this building what they'll do, and I'm telling you to do it anyway, because there's a difference between what it costs you and what it costs the person on the bridge, and that difference is the whole job. That's the entire job, Aiden. Everything else is drawing." The courier came at 1. Aiden Cho stood up at the reception desk and told her to hold the package. Then he went to the project lead, a careful, ambitious woman named Priya Sandhu, 38, who had spent her own career swallowing things, and he laid the hydro bill on her desk. Priya did not laugh. That was the first crack in the old pattern. Priya Sandhu had been the only woman in too many rooms for too long not to recognize the particular handwriting of someone who'd done the math 6 times, because they knew no one would give them the benefit of the doubt, even once. She read it again. She felt the cold settle in her own stomach. And then she asked the question that Gerald Voss, when he got back from his steak, would refuse to ask. Where did this come from? So Aiden told her. And Priya Sandhu walked down to the 14th floor and found Delphine Marchand restocking paper towels in the women's washroom. And she did something no one in that building had done in the 4 years Delphine had cleaned it. She introduced herself. I'm Priya, I run the bridge. I know who you are, Miss Sandhu, Delphine said. I clean your office. You also just saved it, Priya said. Will you come upstairs and walk me through it? Slowly, as if I'm the one who doesn't have the degree. The 2 o'clock deadline came and went with the package still on the desk. Gerald Voss came back at 2:40, expansive and warm from the steakhouse, and walked into a boardroom full of people standing around a hydro bill, and the temperature in the room was nothing like warm. The story he was told, by his own project lead, in front of his own staff, was that the firm's flagship design had a connection that would fail under load, that the error had been flagged 3 weeks ago and dismissed, that the city deadline had been deliberately missed, and that the analysis demonstrating all of this had been done by hand, on the back of a utility bill, by the woman who cleaned the boardroom they were standing in. There was a moment. Priya saw it, Aiden saw it, even Delphine, standing by the door where she'd put herself out of habit, saw it, when Gerald Voss could have become a different kind of man. He could have said, show me. He could have said, thank God someone caught it. The good version of this story, the one that does the most for everyone, is the one where the powerful man hears that he was wrong and is grateful. Because gratitude is what a bridge that doesn't kill anyone is worth. Gerald Voss did not become a different man. He looked at the hydro bill and he looked at Delphine and he said, is this a joke? We have a cleaning lady doing our structural analysis now? And Delphine Marchand, who had promised herself for 20 years that she would never again tell a man with a degree that he was wrong, looked Gerald Voss in his 60-year-old eyes above his $800 shoes, and broke her promise. My name is Delphine Marchand, she said. I did 3 years of civil at Cambrian before a man like you put his name on my work and pushed me out for complaining. I have been cleaning your offices for 4 years, and I have read every drawing your firm has left on a table, because reading them is the only part of the job I was ever allowed to keep. Your eastern abutment connection has a safety factor of 81%. That means it does not hold. It is not an opinion, and it is not a joke, and you do not have to like where it came from. You have to fix it. And if you send it to the city anyway because you can't stand the idea that a cleaning lady caught what your seniors missed, then when it comes down, and it will come down in cold weather under load, every person on it is on you, not me. I told you, it's in writing. On the back of my hydro bill, which I'd like back, by the way, because I haven't paid it yet. The boardroom did not breathe. Priya Sandhu, who had spent her whole career swallowing things, did not swallow this one. She said, I checked it myself. Aiden checked it. The package stays here. We're not sending a bridge to the city that doesn't pass our own analysis, and I'm not putting my stamp on something I know fails. If you want to overrule that, you can put your name on it. Yours. By itself. There it was, the thing Gerald Voss could not do. Because a man who would step over a wet floor sign rather than walk around it is a man who has built his entire life on never being the one holding the liability. He could humiliate a janitor. He could not sign his own name above a number that read .81. Those are different kinds of men. And Gerald Voss had spent 40 years being the second kind precisely so that he would never have to be the first. He left the room. The package stayed on the desk. And the Rideau crossing went back into design, where over the next 6 weeks the connection was redesigned, the bolt group resized, the thermal term added to the model, and a quiet line item appeared in the firm's risk log noting that a flag concern had not been adequately resolved on first submission, a line that, 2 years later, when a different city auditor asked hard questions, would matter a great deal. What happened to Delphine is the part people most want to hear, and it is not as clean as the stories make it. There was no scene where Gerald Voss apologized, because he never did. Men like Gerald Voss retire with their certainty intact and a plaque in a lobby, but Priya Sandhu was not Gerald Voss. The Monday after, Priya did not offer Delphine a janitor's continued employment. She offered her a desk. It was not glamorous. Delphine did not have the credential, and you cannot stamp drawings in Ontario without one, and the world does not rearrange itself overnight for a 43-year-old woman from Hearst, no matter how good she is. What Priya offered was a job as a design technician, checking connections, running the numbers, the unglamorous load path work that turned out to be the exact thing Delphine had been doing for free, in her head, every time she emptied a recycling bin for 4 years. The pay was nearly doubled, and there was a line in the offer, added by Priya by hand, that the firm would cover Delphine's tuition if she wanted to finish the degree that Bergeron had taken from her 2 decades and 300 kilometers ago. She took it. Of course she took it. She was 43 years old, sitting in a community college lecture hall at night beside kids younger than the analysis she'd done in her sleep, and she was, by every account, the best student they had ever seen. Though this time, when the silence fell over the room after she answered, it was a different silence, because this time she'd learned she was allowed to be in it. Old Aiden Cho, who had found his voice in a boardroom with a hydro bill, became someone who flagged things and kept flagging them, and 3 years later he was a project lead himself, and the first thing he did was institute a rule that any concern raised about a connection got resolved on paper before it got dismissed in a meeting, a rule the staff called, behind his back and then eventually to his face, the Marchand check. And the bridge, the gold-lit ribbon over the canal, got built properly, and it carried the winterlude crowds, and the grandmother on the skates with her grandkids slung over her shoulder crossed it on a Saturday at -26, and never had any reason to know that she was alive on the far bank, because a woman who'd been told her whole life that her mind didn't count had refused, one sleepless night in Vanier, to believe it. So here is what's worth sitting with, before you click away to the next thing. The world is full of Delphine Marchands. It is absolutely crawling with them, the brilliant kid in the frost-feathered kitchen, the woman pushing the squeaking cart, the guy who fixes your transmission and could have designed the engine. The people we have decided in advance cannot possibly know more than we do because of where they're standing or what they're wearing or where they came from. We step over them like wet floor signs, and the terrible ordinary truth is that most of them stay quiet because every single one of them has a Bergeron in their past who taught them what being right costs. The system does not run on stupid people in the right places. It runs, mostly, on smart people in the wrong ones, who learned a long time ago to keep their answers to themselves. Delphine's story turned out the way it did for one reason, and it wasn't her brilliance. She'd had the brilliance the whole time, sitting unused above a recycling bin for 4 years. It turned out the way it did because on the day it counted, there was an Aiden Cho who chose to be afraid and say it anyway, and a Priya Sandhu who chose not to swallow it, and those 2 ordinary acts of courage did what one woman's genius never could have done alone. You will be in that boardroom someday. Maybe you already have been. Maybe you're the one with the feeling in your stomach you've been taught to ignore, and the question is whether you'll be Aiden at 7 in the morning or Aiden at 11:40. Or maybe, and this is the harder one, maybe you're the one holding the cleaning cart, certain you're the only one in the room who sees the joint that's going to fail, wondering whether being right is worth what it always cost you before. It is. Not because the world will reward you, it might not. Gerald Voss never said sorry. It's worth it because somewhere there's a grandmother on a pair of skates, crossing a bridge on the coldest Saturday of the year, and she will never know your name, and she will get to the other side. Say the thing. On the back of a hydro bill if you have to, say it anyway. I think about that boardroom more than I'd like to admit. Not the part where Delphine finally spoke. Everyone wants that part. The clean little fireworks of a janitor putting a senior partner in his place. I think about the 4 years before it, when she emptied Gerald Voss's recycling bin and said nothing, because she'd already paid once for being right, and the bill nearly broke her. What I've come to believe is that nothing in this story happened by accident. Voss didn't fall because the universe is fair. It isn't. He fell because of who he'd spent 40 years training himself to be. A man who'd step over a wet floor sign rather than walk around it, who built his whole life on never being the one to sign his name above a number he couldn't defend. When the moment came, that long habit of dodging responsibility was the exact thing that left him standing in a room with no good options. We don't get punished for our worst day. We get punished for the 1,000 small days that made it inevitable. And Delphine didn't rise because she was brilliant. She'd been brilliant the entire time, sitting unused above a bin. She rose because 3 ordinary things finally lined up. There was the honesty to do the math 6 times by hand and refuse to pretend the joint held when it didn't. That stubborn unwillingness to lie to herself even when lying would have been safer. There was the raw mind, yes, the thing nobody could take from her even after Bergeron took everything else. But mostly there was the grit to walk back into that room at 11:40 and put the hydro bill on Aiden's desk, knowing exactly what it had cost her last time. Cleverness alone would have kept quiet. Cleverness alone is how smart people end up pushing carts. It was the courage stacked on top of the cleverness that built the bridge. Here's the thing I can't shake. Delphine couldn't have done it without Aiden choosing to be afraid and speak anyway, or Priya refusing to swallow it one more time. 3 people each doing one decent, frightening thing. That's how the grandmother on the skates made it across the canal that February, not on genius, but on 3 people deciding their own comfort was worth less than a stranger's life. So if you take anything from her, don't just sharpen your mind. Sharpen the part of you that won't lie even when the lie is easier, and the part that says the hard thing at 11:40 instead of staying quiet at 7. The mind gets you into the room. Those other 2 get you to do something once you're there. Be honest enough to see the flaw, smart enough to prove it, and brave enough to say it out loud, on the back of a hydro bill, if that's all you've got. Say it anyway.